Welcome to the third annual virtual Aquaponic Cannabis Conference. Please support these companies. They took the time to educate us during this conference. All right. Next up, we have Tanner Stewart and Cara from Stewart Farms.
Hello.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Steve, how you
Thank
doing,
for
man?
having us.
We're doing well. For those of you that aren't aware, Stewart Farms is a aquaponics facility up in Canada. We've had them on last year and definitely looking forward to their presentation again this year. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for having us. You know, it's really special for us to have a venue at least once a year right now to take a look at what we did and absorb it ourselves. And then Kara, she had to prep me for this, and I had to get my brain back into science mode and out of business mode, which is honestly like a massage on the brain. So it's good to be here, man. Very good. So I guess I'll give a intro to me, the company, and then I'll turn it over to Kara. So for any of you that didn't see last year, my name is Tanner Stewart, CEO of Stewart Farms. I'm here with Kara Nordstrom, our chemist, who has our latest R&D project to present to all of you today. Quick personal background: I've been an entrepreneur for 17 years. 8 years ago, I started an aquaponics farming in leafy greens. I was 100% focused on spinach, kale, arugula, Swiss chard, and a 12-story nutrient film technique leafy green system, fully closed loop aquaponic system. So a lot of the things that informed the direction of Stewart Farms today started in that leafy green operation 8 years ago. Since 2018, I've been all in on cannabis in aquaponics with living soil. Little bit about Stewart Farms. I'll just share my screen here with you guys. See if I can get this working here. Oh, there we go. I gotta press the share button. There we go. Pardon. All right. I don't know if you guys seeing what I'm trying to show you. Okay. So Stewart Farms has two lines of products here in Canada. First is our wellness line of products under our brand Rebound. We sell infused bath bombs, pain creams, Epsom salts. We just got into sublingual sprays, high potency CBD sublingual spray, and organic MCT oil. In the wellness category, we're number one in British Columbia. This is as of coming into the fall here, and we're number 5 in Canada. I fully expect us to be number 1 in Canada in the wellness category by the end of 2023. Of course, we're here to talk about the cultivation side of our business. So all of our craft cannabis is getting transitioned to sell and operate under our newly 2023 launching brand, East Coast Buds, because you can always rely on your East Coast buds. That's the line, at least. And our premier strain, which we didn't do this research project on, but Daily Grape is launching in British Columbia and Nova Scotia under the East Coast Buds brand. This is a absolutely gorgeous genetic, and I just want to throw in here, actually, because Aqualitas, we're close friends with Aqualitas. We do a lot of friendly work together. They're one province over in Nova Scotia. We're in New Brunswick. I know Myrna, their CEO, very well. Happy to be following up that presentation with ours. We actually won 3rd place with our Daily Grape in that same cannabis cup that Aqualitas won 1st place in with their Queen Sangria. And for all of us living soil, microbial, aquaponic geeks who are live streaming this right now and who's going to be watching this on the recording later, the significance of that is there was 13 entrants from all across Canada, really, really strong entrants. And 2 of the 3 winning genetics were cultivated by living soil aquaponics growers, and then a hydroponic grower snuck into second place there. But we were the only two living soil growers with an aquaponic fed system. We were the only two living growers, period. Everybody else was aquaponically driven, and we placed first and third. Now, we all know the right selection of genetic has a major component of that. However, when you're doing a 13 company blind taste test, nobody knew who was who. You're just going off of flavor, smokability, experience, and not really even experience, because when you smoke 13 genetics back to back, you're just a level of high at that point, right? So you're just going off flavor. And so there was something tasty enough and special enough in our flower that got us two of those three spots. So that cannot be underappreciated there, you know. And I put a quick comment in the chat there when the previous speaker just brought up that meta-analysis, or there's papers that indicate there wasn't a significant difference between hydroponics and aquaponics. Well, that depends on what they're comparing. You're just comparing yield, or you're just comparing potency, because the final and ultimate comparison is experience and flavor, and those are very nuanced things to look at. So Stewart Farms' primary focus and an ongoing basis on research in aquaponics, we are very microbiome focused, specifically within the plant growth promoting microbial world. So our research right now is very foundational. We're moving our research as forward as fast as we can, while balancing, you know, building a company from scratch and becoming commercially viable in the long term. And we'll talk more about that 50 minutes from now on the commercial aquaponics panel. But what I'm saying here is, I wish we were moving faster with our research, but I'm still very happy, as you're going to see here with this great presentation Carrie put together, that we're moving forward. We're going to keep our body of foundational research going, and just keep moving the dial forward while balancing all of the other challenges of the cannabis industry in general, and building a company. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kara to introduce herself, and she can get right into the presentation.
Hello, as Tanner said, my name is Kara Nordstrom, and I was originally graduated in 2008 from the University of New Brunswick with an honors first class in chemistry, and I studied a lot of theoretical quantum chemistry, so it doesn't really link up very well with the work I've been doing lately for Stewart Farms, but it did give me a little bit of background into just kind of the idea of asking a lot of questions and then just trying to make sense of what you're seeing as results in a preliminary way. I went on to teach for a while, and now I've decided to kind of return to the field of science, and I ended up with Stewart Farms kind of in this position, trying to help them keep pushing these projects forward as best as we could with what we had on hand all the time. I'm going to call it science on the fly, I think, is what I'm going to describe what we do at Stewart Farms, because everything we do is fast and it's gathered quickly, and you know, we do what we can with what we've got.
So I like to call it, say just a synonym for what she said, I call it research in motion. I abbreviated it to RIM. RIM. We were going to call our company RIM. I Googled it. Some company called BlackBerry was called anyway, so we couldn't call ourselves research in motion. But
okay, so I'm going to see if I can share my screen here and just go through the preliminary things that we've found so far. I came in at the tail end of the previous presentation. It looks like there would be a lot of useful information there that I could draw from to kind of help direct where we're going to go in the future, and maybe just get a little bit more context for some of the information I'm seeing. Can people see that screen okay? Okay, so let me just see if I can figure out how to get it into, there we go. Okay, so we're going to start by just quickly summarizing where they were last year at this time. So we have a small aquaponic system that has Black Nile tilapia, and we've been kind of trying to look at the influence of cultivation effluent on the biomass, the wet mass of the cannabis yield. We'd like to be looking at some point into the cannabinoid acid concentrations as well, and the terpene concentrations, but I'll talk more about some of the challenges we had in that area. on cannabis sativa. So the study we did particularly pertained to a strain of dosi cake that we were pretty fond of. So it's the basis of a larger study, as Tanner mentioned, to continue working forward into looking into the microbiome of the soil and the fish effluent and how those can work together to promote making nutrients in the soil more available to the plant at different stages of the plant's growth. So we chose Black Nile tilapia initially because we have a great set of genetics to begin with, and because they're very, very resistant to disease. So it's relatively easy to raise them and to keep them on site without a lot of issues. We had 400 or so. I think we ended up realizing we had a lot more than 400 when we ended up looking at our tanks a little more carefully, but at the time we had about 400, or thought we did. And we were capturing the effluent in this tank here on the side. And because we're trying to do comparative studies where we're comparing what happens when we use the fish effluent versus when we use filtered tap water, we come and gather the water that we need from the fish effluent tank to water our plants each time we're going to run a study. So Tanner's very proud of this room.
Yeah, and I just want to throw a little more context in around this specific Black Nile tilapia genetic. There are very few pedigree genetic breeding programs for any fish in general. Salmon is the most widely stabilized genetic in the world in the fish category across obviously various different genetics, but salmonoids. Everything else is lesser in the entire fish kingdom, sturgeon and tilapia. So this genetic is one of the few very stable ninth generation disease-free genetics. My fish mentor, Gary Chapman, they're his genetics. He is partners with a guy actually out of, I think it's Arizona, Damon, not remembering his last name right now, but some of you might even buy your Americulture is the name of the company. So Americulture, some of you might even be familiar with Americulture. If you're buying a lot of tilapia fingerlings in general, they're an excellent source for these genetics. You could probably get these same fingerlings from Americulture. I could follow an email up with Steve and maybe give him that information as well. But for us using this genetic, there's no unknowns with it. It's got 25 years of repeatable growth rates, repeated obviously progressively improving conversion rates and progressively improving generation after generation of performance in the genetic, but a very, very stable fish genetic. So this is what I like to call a consistent variable in our system, where it's a biological variable, but it's very consistent as a baseline fish.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. As I said, Tanner, he knows his fish and he's proud of the fish that we have on site. So I always give him his opportunity to make sure everyone knows the great fish we've got there. We all love them too. Okay, so the results of that experiment did seem to demonstrate initially that you would get improved yields with plants that were watered using at least some fish effluent. But one of the challenges we noticed during the grow was that there was some nutrient toxicity observed by the cultivation team. So in the terms of the way that the plants appeared and the leaves and the other things that they were noticing. And we were wondering if that was caused by soil or if that was caused by the fish effluent. We ended up deciding to incorporate that into the continuation of this study a little bit. So you'll notice some changes into the way we've designed this secondary study. So the second study got carried out starting in May, and we took 180 of the dosi cake genetic and we had them put into a media-based aquaponics where we were using either filtered water only for their entire growth cycle or the fish effluent for their entire growth cycle. And we had our soil A located for a few pots on each table, which would have been our previous soil, our control soil. And then we had a different soil, which I'm calling soil B, that we wanted to compare to see if the soil or the fish water was the main cause of that nutrient toxicity that people were observing as they were caring for the plants. So the information that gave us the clue about the nutrient toxicity beyond just the visual cues was the result of a soil sample we had done. So as you can see here, sorry, I realized that I need to move this because it's in the way of what I'm seeing. There we go. On the left, soil A, which is the one we had been using, has a very high level of nitrogen and phosphorus, which are both important to the cycle of the cannabis plant as it grows, but too much is not always a good thing, right? You want to find the sweet spot for every nutrient as you're growing. So we were wondering, if you compare the amounts, there's about half as much nitrogen and there's about 1/10 of the phosphorus. So we just wanted to see what kind of effect that would have. Yes, okay. So the layout of the room, 180 plants. Everything in blue was watered with filtered water. Everything in green was watered with only fish effluent. And as you can see, I just had a few control pots on the front of each table, and then everything else was in that new soil. That was based on the availability of the soil at the time. It would have been better to have a larger control sample, but we had to work with what we had access to at the time that the experiment was starting.
Yeah, so to clarify a little bit here, the control sample was the soil with the high toxicity that we used in last year's experiment. We put a single line of the dosi cakes along the front as the supposed control. We've already well established that mixture of living soil was not conducive to continuing with, so we eliminated that from our process. That soil was deemed an inconsistent biological variable, so we are now with a more consistent living soil, and that's what you're seeing here. So soil B.
Okay. So what we noticed quickly is if you look at the top two rows, the filtered water versus the Melodicus effluent for the control, you do see about a 15-gram difference. But the more interesting thing that we've discovered quickly here is just the massive difference between the two soils. So the yields were significantly larger when we switched to the new soil. You do see about a 10-gram difference as well with the fish effluent versus the filtered water in soil B as well. So we are seeing some slight increases in our wet yield as we go. We wanted to look at that and see if we could find a little bit more meaning in those numbers. Again, this is just the very first time that we've looked at this soil. It's only the second time we've run this study formally and gathered a ton of data. So there's a lot more work to be done with this to figure out exactly what the trends we're seeing are, but it is the initial steps. So what I ended up doing is kind of developing a box plot. A box plot is just a very simple way of visualizing your data in 25% quarters. So each little section of a box plot represents roughly 25% of your data. So you see the box section, and that black line in the middle would represent the median average of your data. And then the top half of the box is 25%, the bottom half of the box is 25%. And then these little small lines, I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen, but these little small lines or tails coming out of either side represent roughly 25% of your data. And these dots represent outlier points that don't fit within the data statistically. So if we look at soil A and we compare filtered water to the fish effluent, we can see that the median yield is higher in the fish effluent, but we can also see that the potential yield gets a lot bigger as well, because you can see a large section of 25% of this data is well above the weights, which are listed kind of off to the left here on this axis. It's well above even the highest yielding non-outlier plant for the filtered water in the controls. If you jump to the next section, it's showing soil B, which is the new soil that we've brought into use. Both filtered and fish effluent have a significantly higher yield, with an average much closer to 300 grams wet versus the soil A. And again, we see a little bit of a difference in the median masses. So let's just have a quick look at that. So we've determined the soil has a significant impact on that harvest mass. The fish effluent, it's less noticeable, but there's some potential encouraging details here. The first thing to observe is that if you look at the fish effluent watered plants, about 40% of the plants have an over 300 gram yield of wet mass plant and a top mass of about 375 grams. When you compare that to the filtered water, only 25% of the plants are hitting above 300 grams. Okay. When you look at our top 25 plants specifically, I didn't include this slide, 17 of them were watered with fish effluent. So that's well over half. There is more variance in the range. The highest high is higher, the lowest low is a little bit lower. So there's a larger variance overall in that fish effluent, but there is some potential to see that you might be able to, with some refinement of the method of fish water application, or if we can refine the fish effluent in other ways, we might be able to maximize this yield even more. The other thing that I didn't include in the PowerPoint, but that we noticed kind of observationally, is that the plants that were getting fish effluent held out a little bit longer before they were showing signs of needing a little bit of chemical amendment during the growth cycle. So the other thing that we're hoping that we'll be able to do at some point as we continue moving forward, the wet harvest yield is currently about 3% higher if we look at soil B. Okay, so this median versus the one to the right, it's about 3% higher. But if we could refine our fish water so that all I'm doing is pushing that yield average up to 300, that would represent an 8% higher yield overall. And if we could ambitiously even get up to the higher end of the quartile, to the 320 gram wet harvest mass, the increase is going to jump to about 15%. So one of the things we're going to be looking at moving forward is what are things we can do to improve the quality of the fish effluent, whether that's feeding the fish something different, whether that's doing something to improve the quality of the fish effluent as it's coming through our system. There's going to be questions that we have to ask there and look into and kind of test as well. If it might be as simple as changing when we're adding the fish effluent to the cannabis plants, that could be part of the process as well. So there's questions, but we're just trying to highlight that there's some potential here for some significant increases as we go. We are seeing slight increases now. Another question I was wondering that people might have is that, does this carry through to your dry yields? And if I compare my dry yields, they're about 3.5% higher overall for the fish effluent water plants versus the filtered water plants. Potency, we unfortunately had some struggles being able to find any meaningful data. The tool we have on site right now is very useful in terms of being able to kind of highlight promising phenotypes during the phenotype hunting phase, because it can give you a reasonably accurate assessment of the types of cannabinoid potency level you're going to see. But when you're trying to compare plant to plant within one strain, it doesn't have enough precision or accuracy to kind of give you meaningful differences, I think. So we are able to use it as a good screening tool when we're going through trying to decide which of Tanner's genetics we want to study in more detail and which ones we want to keep off to the side for the time being. But we do need to spend some more time studying the effect on cannabinoids and terpenes based on where we are right now. It looks like Tanner has something to say.
Yeah, so just before we parade off into microbial land here, which is the next section. Steve, does anybody have any, maybe go back to that chart real quick, Kara, back one slide. Does anybody have any questions on this yield information or these charts or this chart?
There was one question: how much extra cost / time did the fish effluent add on?
It's not significant. The way we typically do it right now, it takes maybe 10 minutes to get the water into the barrel at the beginning, but then all we're doing is we're connecting a hose fitting to a pump that's in the fish water, and then you can go around and water the plants exactly the same way if you're hand watering plants to begin with. So for us, it's not adding a significant amount of time, just the 10 minutes it takes to gather the fish effluent at the beginning. In terms of maintaining the fish system, I can't really answer the question there. Tanner would have a better idea of the cost of maintaining the fish system.
Yeah, well, I mean, for us, the fish system is obviously a research focused system as opposed to a commercially viable fish system. So there's a overarching cost of that for our company. Luckily, in Canada, we have a series of quite significant and well-structured research grant programs and funding initiatives. So luckily, we're able to get all of this research subsidized in concert with our commercial activities. But to Kara's point, once you get past the fish system, once you extract the effluent from the fish system, it's just integrated. It's no different than a hydroponic system. But let's think about that operationally. So let's compare just quickly a entire hydro system versus an entire aquaponic system. You have barrels and tanks, and you've got to control the inputs of all of your NPKs individually or decide what pre-mixed nutrients you're using, and you have to monitor the pH in real time. So with living soil added into at least this equation in particular, we save a lot of time versus a hydroponic system in a lot of ways as well. So it's really just structured, it depends on how your company's structured right from the very beginning, right?
Okay.
It's the only question I saw as far
Great.
as that goes.
Let's go to Microbial.
Okay, let's go to Microbial. Okay, so soil testing. And again, this is where things got a little bit more challenging for me because again, full disclosure, my background is chemistry, not biology. We do have a biologist on site that helps kind of work through, but this was kind of my baby. I'm the person who had time to take this on a little bit. So we're going to look at some of the preliminary questions and ideas I drew from the data that we got. So for soil and water testing, we took samples and sent them away to DAL, actually, so that ties up nicely with your previous speaker, who also is at DAL, to their integrated microbiology resource. We did some PacBio full-length amplicon sequencing, which, to my understanding, just targets specific segments of DNA that should be similar to different microbes, and then is able to identify single base pair differences. So if you remember your high school biology and you remember the double helix about DNA, the base pairs are all unique here. And if you can get specific segments of the DNA within a microbe that should be the same in every microbe on some level, and then continue reading past that, you can start to notice, okay, this one changes in the 10th base pair or in the 20th base pair. So we're able to actually get species level identification of the microbes in the soil and water samples. Now, what that ended up meaning, actually, I'll talk about sample collection quickly. To get the soils, I collected from fresh lots. Nothing had ever been put into these soils. They had never been used to grow anything. I took samples and I froze them. The fish water I took directly from the holding tank. It had never been used in any purpose. It was in that same holding tank that we go to collect the water when we're about to water the plants with the fish effluent. And then I took post-harvest samples. Where I had enough pots, I took samples from 10 pots of each of the soil water combinations that we had. Sometimes I took them from different locations around the room. There were some interesting questions relating microclimates inside grow rooms that I think someone could spend a lot of time studying as well if they really wanted to. But I took samples from 10 different pots and combined them and mixed them, and then took a small sample from that got frozen. Everything was packed on dry ice and sent to DAL very quickly, and then they got the samples, told us they were okay. So I'm not sure what exactly I was expecting to get as results, but what I ended up getting back looked kind of like this. So at the phyla level of bacteria, that's the broadest categorization that starts to distinguish between different types of bacteria. I already had 26 different categories, okay? And then as you keep breaking that down through the taxonomic breakdown into the species level, you just kept seeing more and more and more and more and more diversity to the point where I ended up having 742 different species identified in some capacity in at least one of the samples, okay? So each of these little tiny colors represents a species, and typically, I think the way it tries to set it up is the orange at the top would represent the same type of bacteria being shown in more than one sample. If it was appearing in more than one sample, they would all show up in the same relative locations. But you can see there's a ton of diversity here. And, I got this information back and was kind of like, okay, what am I going to do with this information? This is a lot, and this is going to take a lot of time to interpret. So I decided to just try to look at the surface of the information. I went back to the basic phyla level, and I'm just trying to see what are some things that we can identify here that will give us some future questions to ask and to start looking into. Okay, so the first initial impressions that I came up with was just that at the phyla level, there were 4 categories that were present in all of our samples in great abundance. So we had a lot of proteobacteria, a lot of actinobacteria, bacteroidota, and planktomycetota. Okay, so we have lots of those that are common to every sample. So what I decided to do next is I wanted to look at specifically our fish effluent, which is the sample labeled FW, so that's this one here, versus soil B, which is this one here. And I just wanted to say, is there a very simple statement I could make about whether or not using fish effluent is actually introducing anything into the soil that stays there when it's done, okay? And in this first time around, the impression that I'm getting, and I'm willing to certainly take feedback here if I've got this a little bit confused, but I think what I was seeing is that in the fish water, we started to see some slightly different phyla that I wasn't seeing in soil B. So I've highlighted, this one is called Firmicutes, This one is called Chloroflexi. This one is called Gemma timonidota. And if you look at the fresh soil B that has never been used for any growth and never been watered with anything, you can see that it doesn't have those distinct colors. It has a tiny little bit of that orange color, but it has none of that blue and none of that pink, okay? If we look at where I'm analyzing the soil that has had that fish effluent introduced after the harvest, I'm suddenly starting to see that blue and that pink, okay? So all I'm wondering there is, does that mean I've introduced microbes? That's the next question we're asking. The only way we can really verify that is to kind of focus on that study in more detail and try to replicate it a few more times and see if we are consistently seeing that, or if this was a false positive that's occurred somehow in the process. But it's the potential for wondering, have we actually managed to introduce some microbes that weren't there before, okay? The second part of that question, though, is, did we introduce helpful microbes? If we did introduce microbes, well, what are they? What did we put in there? And again, very surface level initial impressions. Nitrogen fixation, we're going to need microbes that are going to help make nitrogen in the soil available to the cannabis plant. The primary genus that I was able to discover is important for that is called Rhizobia, and that's found in proteobacteria. And remember, that was one of the ones that was common to all of our samples. So it seems like that's already present even just in the living soil formulation that we had. But the second one that's important is going to be your phosphorus solubilizer. So phosphorus in itself is inorganic, and you need to find ways to make it soluble so it can be taken up by the plant's roots and then used in the flowering stage of the cycle. And that's typically found in the genus called Bacillus, and Bacillus is typically found in firmicutes. So if we come back here, we remember that one of the things that wasn't in soil B when it was dry was firmicutes, but now it is there when I've combined the fish effluent with the soil, okay? So other questions. Are there firmicutes in every water? Maybe firmicutes exist in all water, whether it comes from a tap or whether it comes from a fish effluent pond. These are other questions we have to ask, okay? But these are just initial impressions that we're looking at to say, what are we adding and does it have a benefit? So there is potentially a benefit here if it's actually introducing microbes. I did try to look at some of the, the breakdown I was given was a great big spreadsheet that told me species by species by species, and it told me whether or not it was present in the different samples that I was looking at. And I did try to do some species breakdowns and Google some species names and find some research papers that talked about these species names that were present in the fish water. But what kept happening to me is I would find that it was, you know, a soil microbe that was found in the soils of Siberia, but it didn't have any other information about what its function was or what purpose it served in the soil in Siberia. So I think part of the issue is just that bacteria themselves are such a huge category, and there's so many of them in soil in general, that it's very hard to get detailed information. Again, previous speaker might be able to help me out with that. There is a list that I had seen in there about the different research they had been doing, so maybe they've got some information that I can go back to and be able to kind of refine this a little bit more. So this is just kind of talking about the idea, can we add better stuff? So instead of just dumping the fish effluent without doing anything to it from the tank, can we do something that will make the fertilizer better? So remembering that you need more nitrogen early on in the vegetative stage and then less during flowering, and then you need to increase your phosphorus content during flowering. We're also thinking about the work that we're doing with Dr. Victor Lobanov, who's at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. So he is trying to figure out ways to make use of fish waste as natural fertilizers, as energy sources. He has a whole bunch of ideas, and part of his idea is creating this biodigester style tool. So one of his big goals is going to be to take that biodigester and allow it to produce like methane gas and other energy sources. But one of the other things that we're thinking about is, could we use that in a different way for our purposes, where we could add organic inputs? So, you know, products that people have grown or parts of crops that people don't use into the fish waste and kind of produce a better type of, almost like a compost tea, I guess. And could we use that to target the specific nutrient compositions at specific stages of the grow if we have this system in place? So that's kind of one of the other components that we're looking at, is how do we take this fish effluent and maximize it specifically for cannabis? Yeah. So that was a study that is also.
So I just want to jump in there. So Steve, is Dr. Lobanov speaking this year?
Oh, he's not speaking this year. No, but he did speak last year. Yeah.
He did speak last year. So I just want to bring that up. So if it wasn't for this conference last year, he spoke either right before me or right after me. And I watched his presentation on everything he was doing in biodigesters. Now, again, back to our research is moving forward slower than we like. I spoke with him the next week after the conference, and we're still working on implementing a joint research project that'll hopefully be this calendar year. But because of this conference, I saw the work he was doing. I reached out right away. It was compelling. It was a compelling presentation. And I thought, I got to geek out with this guy and see if we can advance some of this body of work together. So it's so important to have these communities for us to come together and, see what everybody's working on and where can we not double up and how can we accelerate these projects, as a group, right? So you go ahead, Gara.
Okay. So that's one of the questions we're also trying to ask. I feel like what I've done so far with this presentation is that here's some questions I asked and here's the questions it raised. I feel like that's kind of what happened to me while I was doing this research. So some of the limitations, the mass data shows that there's potential for fish effluent, but we haven't fully realized it, right? A 3% increase yield, you always want any increase you can get, but we also want to see, okay, how do I drive 3% to 8%, or how do I drive it to 15%? We had limitations for cannabinoid testing and terpene testing, so we're a little bit disappointed we weren't able to bring more to the table on that front, but we're hoping that that's something we can rectify in the future. And again, just the overwhelming amount of microbial data needs a lot more study. Again, I just touched the surface level and then kind of set it up so that someone else could come in and continue on with these questions that we're raising. Some of the things we're hoping we can do in the future would be repeat sampling. In science, the first thing you have to do is figure out, okay, I've done this. Can I do it again? Can I get the same results more than once? Because, you have to demonstrate that what you're doing is repeatable. Target microbes. So can we figure out if there's specific microbes in our fish effluent that we want to try to maximize or target and kind of identify as most important? Can we manipulate our water microbiome? So maybe that's the biodigester type of tool that we're talking about with the work with Dr. Lobanov. Maybe that's talking about what we're feeding the fish. There's a whole bunch of ways that we could potentially try to manipulate that microbiome. Testing these compost tea style fish effluents versus our traditional soil amendments that you're scooping on top and then watering in as you go, and then retesting our mass yield results and getting some potency results. One of the other things that I kind of thought of at the last second as I was going for Christmas break, and I just kind of threw a piece of paper on the director of cultivation's desk and said, well, okay, what about this? If we see that there's lots of nitrogen fixers that appear to be present in the fish effluent, what would happen if you only used it during the early stages of the grow when it needs lots of nitrogen fixation, and then you stopped adding it for the second half where you need less nitrogen, you want to focus more on phosphorus? And then what if you did it in reverse? So we've kind of said, what if it's about timing of fish effluent instead of just always using fish effluent? And I think that she is going to try to take that on, but it was just kind of another question at the last second that we're throwing out there that lets us continue looking at what is fish effluent doing and trying to put a little bit of data together to look at that. Again, observationally, we've been noticing the fish effluent when we're using it seems to hold the plants healthy longer. They don't seem to need as many chemical amendments. They don't need to seem to need them quite as soon. So it's always nice if you can avoid putting chemically synthesized products onto your cannabis. But yeah, so we're just trying to put together what we can here, and we're going to keep trying to drive this project step by step, question by question, data piece by data piece until.
And I just want to clarify that when Stewart Farms uses amendments, the only amendments we ever use is an organically sourced amendment. So we actually don't use synthetic.
Oh, apologies.
Chemically.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So just in case that's being misunderstood. But our organic chemicals are still chemicals too. So if we're talking about just chemical category in reference, but we don't use any synthetics. No.
Okay. So that's kind of where I was able to go with the information we had. So I'll stop sharing that now, and I'll kind of step back a little bit now and see if anyone has questions they want to throw at Tanner.
Be here. Juggling, making sure that the panel next door gets their connections together. Let's see. I don't see any questions. I think people are just kind of, a lot of people said, wow, that's really neat. Microbe universe. I don't see too many questions at the moment.
Yeah, the microbial universe is overwhelmed. I mean, I get excited when I see the endless amount of colors on the bar chart and the layers, and as it builds up, and it really demonstrates how much there is to unpack in general. And you know, we're all familiar with this statement when you're in the soil community, and you hear it all the time. You say it all the time. Oh, we know more about the stars than the microbes underneath our feet. Well, you know, when you get into a research project like this, you can see how quick you kind of see that in real time. Like, holy shit, there really is a lot under there.
And I think it really emphasized for us too, the need for baby steps, I guess, kind of saying, okay, we thought maybe we could dive in and be a lot further along. And then we got that data back and we both just looked at it and went, oh, that's a lot of information to try to start unpacking. So we started with some baby steps and said, here's some questions. Here's some ways we might be able to tackle answering some of those questions. But yeah, it was pretty exciting to just get some results that were meaningful and saying, look, here's some actual identifiable things that are in your soil, and not just saying, well, we know there's stuff in there because someone told us that there would be stuff in there if we put fish effluent on our living soil. So
yeah, so this year we're actually going to be transferring this same type of research over to our new genetic daily grape. The exciting thing about that is we're going to be running 2 to 3 rooms of daily grape at any one time. We spent the last 2 years hunting through our genetic library. We have a very strong foundation of what we view as stabilized and available to commercialize genetics. And as much as from a you know, genetic fanatic perspective, I would have loved to continue to have my entire facility dedicated to pheno hunting for another 12 to 24 months. We decided it's time to take our premier genetic and spend the next 12 months or so monocropping. But then the new exciting thing about that is you park the hunting and you stop building up new genetics to learn about, and now we can run multiple of these trials repeatedly back to back. We're going to have 10 to 15 harvests of daily grape over the next 12 months that we can run repeatable trials on. Of course, this foundational information came from a different genetic. It came from Dosey Cake. So it may or may not lose some relevance. I don't think it will, because we're looking at the water microbes and the soil microbes, but we'll have a different genetic to infer to, at least to see if there's any commonalities between the Dosey Cake foundation research and the daily grape research. So pretty excited about the next 12 months of monocropping from a research and commercial perspective. So
Find anything particularly different or interesting when you're doing your pheno hunts? Anything noteworthy or unique? I know I'm doing a large pheno hunt here right now in Thailand. What have you found that was you know, interesting outliers or funky terpene profiles, or what are some of the different things that you found?
oh, just in general? Oh man, all kinds of stuff. One genetic in particular, one of our phenos of Royal Limes that we popped from, that's an Emerald Mountain genetic. It was, this isn't to do with the aquaponics or the living soil necessarily, although it might. It was just oozing you know, oil or sap, right? And it would come out of the bud, and it would look like little amber droplets coming out of the weed. And we had about 2 phenotypes that did that. And I've seen some images of that before, but we've never, you know, these are the first couple of phenos we found that were just oozing out oil. And I mean, I thought that was just amazing. We have like dozens of pictures of that, and then it solidifies such that you could just pull it off. You could put it right in the dab rig, right? So full spectrum, fresh, harvested, solidified oil from Royal Limes. So I thought that was pretty awesome. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Anything unique as far as smell or terpene profile?
Well, this daily grape, there's a reason we're going all in on this daily grape in 2023, and the fantastic thing about it when it was getting judged in that cannabis cup this past summer, and it was all blind, well, except we knew which jar was ours because it was the purple jar, right? So I knew right away. I was like, okay, there's our daily grape. But as the judges were passing it around, we heard, oh, that smells really grapey, right? And it's easy to get a very identifiable lemon and a very identifiable gas, but it's a lot rarer to have a grape that denotes grape on the nose, because that's a lot of nuance of sweetness and gas coming off of that genetic. So this particular genetic, a grape that has those grapey notes right on the nose and pretty identifiable. I'd say this is our most exciting on the nose terpene profile, and it's smooth and it's energetic, and and it's got a sweet gas aftertaste, but an upfront grapey flavor. So no, that was pretty exciting.
Is that Hubba Bubba grape, or is that Welch's grape juice grape? That's what I gotta ask.
Well, that's a great question. I would definitely say it's closer to Welch's than Hubba Bubba. But it's not. It's a mild.
That's actually way more exciting for me.
Yeah, I'd call it a mild Welch's. When I think of that Hubba Bubba kind of taste, it's a bit synthetic-y, right? Leaning, and we're really excited, and you can only launch genetics. I mean, luckily we feel like we've had a pretty good field trial on it too, but you launch genetics you love, and you understand why you love them for such reasons, and that's the best thing you could head into market with at any given moment. In an ocean of competition, right? So and then what's the experience? And the experience is what brings it all together. The look of it, the bag appeal, the nuance of the nose, but then a nice energetic strain that doesn't couch you, that kind of keeps you level. No, and as somebody who is sensitive to high terpinolene strains, that lemon flavored strains send my heart into my throat, too much anxiety, too fast, too rushed. This is not that. This is energy, at least for me and many of the smokers, energy without the raciness, right? So.
Well, you got me convinced. Sounds enticing.
You come see me, we'll smoke lots.
Have you had any other interesting discoveries or observations with your cultivation in the last year?
Just the continuous yield improvements. I mean, a lot of that is team driven, of course, and process driven, on top of what is your grow medium and how are you using it. The resilience in the system. I mean, we're more than 2 years in. There's never been a speck of PM in our facility ever. We've never sprayed. We've never had to use a synthetic. We haven't had any. Maybe we've had a genetic or two, but that would be in the pheno hunt, where we would get some botrytis, and then that would get culled right away, or a little bit, but we haven't had any, barely any issues. Our system is really healthy and really clean, and we always pass our microbials, right? We always pass our microbials. Now, Canadian microbials versus Australian microbials versus what Germany wants, those are all different stories. But within Canada, we've never had to irradiate, and nor do we want to. And I think that's a testament to there's no need to be afraid of living systems. And there's all this apprehension from hydroponic communities and basically a whole side of the farming industry where the sentiment is microbials bad, and how do you control that? Well, we just have a really clean farm, and we operate with soil. We operate in top-notch cleanliness with soil. And then that all just comes down to how are your people potting up, and where do they pot up? And then do you sweep up after yourself. So it's just been honestly a fantastic experience. One thing I'd like to note that was in our presentation is, if you're using a living soil medium, that you need to make sure you are working with a supplier that is going to keep their mixtures consistent. Or if you're the supplier of your own living soil, that if it ain't broke, maybe don't try to fix it, because you can really throw yourself off inadvertently. We've never tried to make our own soil, so I'll just stick to us as somebody who needs a reliable living soil partner in general. My comment, as you're doing your operation, if you're working with a vendor that never changes their formulations and you're very confident in that, great. And you know the baseline of that soil and what you can get out of it. But if there's other suppliers with their living soil mixtures out there, give them a shot every now and then, right? Because you want to see if you want to make sure that by sticking to your guns, you're not leaving 10 or 15% yield on the table just by a swap to a better baseline mixture. So for us, that's just going to be a rule and an ongoing basis. So, you want a consistent supplier. You don't want to sit on your hands and assume you're always using the best mixture forever in a day, because there might be something new, right? That was a big lesson over 2022, and we saved money. We switched our soil, our yields went up, and our cost per pot went down. So it's a pretty good move.
Oh yeah, I know we have a giant industrial size mixer here in Thailand, and it was way too frustrating to find. Just like you're saying, the consistency of the products, it was way easier just to get the ingredients, mix it here, and just not stress about it anymore.
Yeah, because then it's the same mixture every time, and because absolutely. If you need to do that, if you need to take control of it for sure. We just ended up going to a large supplier out of Ontario that's been at it for years and years and years, and they have good labs, and it's very very consistent, because we're trying to do, when you're doing research, you need that. You can't have your inputs flying all over the map, right?
Oh yeah. Somebody else asked, do any aquaponic operators put the expired fishes in their grow containers like Native Americans used to? Or if my third grade teacher was lying about that. So we don't, I don't know of any cannabis people that are putting dead fish in their pots, but we certainly use FAA here, at least where I am, and I've used it many other places. At least for our soil applications as a nitrogen amendment, that we do use. Or hey, if it's Taco Tuesday, we'll take the spines and the leftover meat and the fins. That goes in the FAA,
Nice. Yeah. No, we've had some fish escape or jump from the tank, and we do bury them on our property to add fertility to the land outside, but yeah, we don't mix them into our compost pile either, just because it'll attract animals and whatnot. But that works. But my comment to that is that does work. If you take a dead fish or some other sort of nutrient source and you bury it 1.5 feet or right under the root zone and you leave it there, yeah, no, that does work because there's extra nitrogen down. The fish is slowly going to break down. So my comment to that is, it'll work. Just, do you want to? You're also inviting. Does the fox smell it and show up at your carrot garden or your tomato patch, right?
You definitely don't need polar bears digging up your yard there in Canada,
Yeah.
I think if we start seeing polar bears in New Brunswick, we're going to have some bigger problems to be worrying about other than whether or not they're getting at the fish in the garden.
Yeah, the ice age will have arrived. Yeah, no, we got to watch out for moose mostly down here. But
Moose and
anyway,
drunken hockey fans, right?
moose, yeah, moose drunken hockey fans. But I just have a maple syrup gun that I spray at the moose to make them keep them away, keep them at bay.
Well, anything else you guys want to mention here in the last, we have about 2 minutes left before we have to switch gears. Anything else you guys wanted to mention before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would just say if you're in Canada, please look for Rebound at your local cannabis dispensary. We're pretty much in every province across the country. If you're in British Columbia, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, you can get our Daily Grape coming out pretty soon, and our Brittany's Frozen lemons, and our Royal Kush, which we're Mandelbrot's Royal Kush, which we're still running as well. And to follow us on social media for everybody in general, no matter where you are, we'd appreciate it. On Instagram, it's at Stewart Farms Life, and you have to type in the full word because we're shadow banned, because we're an evil bath bomb making, pain cream making cannabis company trying to ruin lives. And Facebook at stewartfarms.life, and same on Instagram. We just appreciate if you're interested, your support or input or following us. So.
That's great. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. I appreciate Cara giving that wonderful and informative presentation as well. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for having us.
Please support these companies. They took the time to educate us during this conference. If you're looking for more education on aquaponic cannabis, please consider the Aquaponic Cannabis Masterclass at apmjclass.com, featuring over 7 days of in-depth, hands-on educational content with Marty Waddell and Stephen Reisner as your guides through the aquaponic cannabis universe. We'll cover everything from construction of large commercial facilities, home-sized systems, backyard systems, nutrients, pest control, diseases, everything you can think of, and so much more. So be sure to check that out at apmjclass.com. And if you're looking for aquaponic cannabis or living soil pest control courses, please check out thepestclass.com, where we have a huge in-depth course on pest control, how to make your own biocontrols, as well as in-depth guides and identification guides for a whole slew of different pests that you might encounter in your aquaponics garden. And it's not strictly just geared towards cannabis, it's also geared towards vegetables as well. So be sure to check that out if it's something you think you might need to improve in your education.